My name is Sherry Moses, and I'm the Reentry and Employment Policy Analyst at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Before we begin, I have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter connection or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239, and we'll also post that number to the chat box on your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection issues we may not be able to resolve during the webinar. However, we're recording today's webinar, and it'll be posted on our website along with a copy of the slides used in today's presentation. Everyone who registered for the webinar will receive an email as soon as the webinar is posted. You may also check the website directly at csgjusticeCenter.org/NRRC. At the end of today's webinar, we'll have time for questions from the audience. And to ask a question, please enter it in the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible before we end today. Joining me for today's webinar are Jack Mills, the Chief Workforce Strategy Officer at the Insight Center for Community Economic Development, where he staffs the National Network of Sector Partners, Amy McNicholas-Kroll, the Director of Reentry Services at the Allegheny County Jail, where she oversees education and training and other reentry programming. And just a note that Amy's actually joining us today from the jail, so if you hear any emergency announcements while she's speaking, that's why, nothing to worry about. We'll also be joined by Anthony Atkinson, Senior Manager of Program Services for Towards Employment in Cleveland, Ohio, where he oversees the Department of Labor Career Pathways Program for returning citizens. Jack Mills will provide us with an overview of sector partnerships and the National Network of Sector Partners. Amy will then tell us about how Allegheny County Jail has adapted a sectoral strategy for all of their training programs. Anthony Atkinson will tell us about how Towards Employment has adapted the sector model. And contact information will be available for each speaker posted at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. To get started, I want to give a quick overview of the Council of State Governments Justice Center. The Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff provide practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. You can find our website at csgjusticecenter.org and can follow us at Twitter at CSGJC. In addition to serving policymakers, the Justice Center provides technical assistance to all Second Chance Act grantees through the National Reentry Resource Center, or the NRRC, which is funded through the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance. We're constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, new publications, funding opportunities, distance learning events, and other news about reentry. So we encourage everyone who isn't already signed up to sign up for the newsletter by going to csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe. And to access the NRRC, please visit csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. Next slide, please. The scope of reentry is too big to ignore. The jail and prison population has increased by 500% in the last 40 years. 1 in 37 adults were under correctional control in 2016. About 10 million adults in the U.S. are returning from incarceration each year. So that's nearly 600,000 people released from state and federal prisons and 9 million cycling in and out of local jails. about 74 million adults in the U.S. have an arrest or conviction record. Next slide, please. What's the impact of incarceration on people and communities? More young African American men without a high school diploma or GED are behind bars than are employed. 2.7 million children have a parent behind bars. 2/3 of these children's parents were incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. Family income averaged over the years a father is incarcerated is 22% lower than family income the year before a father is incarcerated. Even in the year after a father is released, family income remains 15% lower than it was the year before incarceration. And you can see from this slide that incarceration reduces post-incarceration earning power significantly. Next slide, please. We now have an overall unemployment rate of about 4.3%, which means that employers are hiring and that among the pool of job seekers, millions now have criminal records. In 2012, the EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, updated its guidelines on the use of criminal records in hiring decisions. A blanket ban on hiring people with a criminal record is actually against the law. Employers must consider the type of offense, the time since the offense, and the job being considered. 28 states and more than 150 cities and counties have implemented fair chance hiring practices such as ban the box. And ban the box policies refer to when you can ask about a criminal record, and they provide guidance on how a criminal record can be considered during the hiring process. We all know that if you can get your foot in the door, you have a much better chance of getting the job. So ban the box policies take the box off the initial application, and the box that asks about a criminal record off the initial application. But each policy is a little bit different about who it applies to, whether it's public or private employers, and when you can ask, such as during the interview or after a conditional offer is made. Next slide, please. To inform employers about the challenges and opportunities for hiring people with criminal records, the Justice Center has supported more than 30 dialogues between business leaders and policymakers across 23 states. And we're now working with the Association of Chamber of Commerce Executives to provide information to employers through chambers of commerce across the country. Now I'd like to turn it over to Jack Mills to answer the question, what are sector partnerships and why are they effective for both employers and employees?
Next slide. Hi, everybody. I'm Jack Mills. Thanks, Sherry, for the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today as Chief Workforce Strategy Officer at the Insight Center. My responsibilities include the National Network of Sector Partners, or NNSP. Next slide, please. So the sentence on this slide sums up what sector partnerships are. They are industry specific. Sector partnership has deep knowledge of a particular industry and connections with multiple employers in the industry. They're regional, and that's because economies and labor markets are regional, and they don't necessarily conform to either geographic boundaries or to political jurisdictions. And most importantly, they're solutions-oriented. They're responsive to industry and to worker and to job seeker needs, and that's over the long run. They're not dependent on particular sources of funding in doing that. They keep it going. They benefit the target industry and the job seekers and the workers as well as the community. Next slide, please. NNSP is the National Association for Sector Partnerships and their supporters. So we learn from sector partnerships, from their experience and the lessons they derive from their experience, and also from the research about them. and I'll talk about some of those lessons and some of that research. We use what we learn to provide training and technical assistance, and also to work toward supportive policies and funding. We advocate for, but we also work with sector partnerships to increase economic security, and we focus on low-income individuals and their families and their communities to meet workforce-related needs of industry sectors that are important to those communities and their regional labor markets, to strengthen employment equity so that there's a fair shot for everybody, both at jobs and at promotions, and to improve regional economic vitality. Next slide, please. So what results do sector partnerships achieve for people who have been incarcerated, and also for employers and for the public? There's a lot of research on this question. The good news is that they achieve excellent results. Next slide, please. Random assignment evaluations provide very high-quality evidence. Findings on a random assignment evaluation of sector partnerships that were reported in a tuning in to local labor markets showed significant wage gains for all participants, including participants who had formerly been incarcerated. One of the sector partnerships that was evaluated was WRTP Big Step. They're in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I want to bring them up because 38% of their participants had previously been incarcerated. It's important both for policymakers and sector partnerships and others to know that both those who had been incarcerated and those who had not been previously incarcerated obtained significant earning gains. So sector partnerships can have a significant portion of people who are formerly been incarcerated and still produce those great results. Next slide, please. Sector partnerships also provide great return on investment, or what folks call ROI, for employers. And I want to share two examples. Manufacturing Works is in Chicago, and they're actually a specialized one-stop career center. They're specialized because they focus on manufacturing. They are trusted by Chicagoland's manufacturing employers. Altogether, in the course of the period studied, employers that they worked with made 187 very diverse hires. Here's the thing, they only interviewed 350. That's less than 2 interviews per hire. That's important. Manufacturers benefited by hiring people who met their needs and by a major reduction of the time that they would otherwise have had to spend on recruiting and interviewing. And for any business, manufacturing included, time is money. You know, the Job Opportunity Investment Network, and there in Pennsylvania, had Alyssa Black analyze return on investment of workforce development for several employers, and she used to work for IBM and had helped with this from an IBM team. The ROI for employers ranged from 407 to 469%. And that included increased profit from existing customers, as the folks who had been trained were better at selling to those customers and customer service, improved brand recognition, so the companies did better in their marketplaces, product line expansion, and better HR performance. Next slide, please. So the big question is, what does all this take to produce these results? And sector partnerships, as we've found, have 4 characteristics in common. As I've mentioned, they are industry focused. They have an intense focus on a particular industry within a particular regional labor market, and always with multiple employers in that industry's region, and that's over a sustained period of time. They have leadership by what we call a workforce intermediary, and this can be any kind of organization. The key is that it has credibility in the industry. They create new pathways for low-wage workers into the industry and then up to good jobs and careers. And they also achieve systemic changes. And when I say that, I mean changes that are win-win for employers and for workers and for the community. Examples of systemic changes are changes in employers' policies and practices, like eliminating barriers to hiring people with arrests and convictions, as Sherry was talking about, changing public policy, laws banning the box, or policies that make sector partnership training available in prisons, and changing organizations' practices. For example, so programs build on strengths of people who were incarcerated and also have the support services they need for success. And in all these cases, employers can play a key role in bringing those changes about. Now, the sector partnership model, as I mentioned, shows a workforce intermediary. It's in that blue box or blue oval right in the center. And if you look at what it's doing, it's coordinating delivery of service by multiple organizations, and it's also engaged with multiple employers, those employers on the left-hand side in an industry sector. And you can imagine how this would create pathways to good jobs and careers. Next slide, please. So, as I said a moment ago, sector partnerships engage with multiple employers in a particular industry, and I want to talk about why that is. The result of focusing on employers in an industry sector is that it's possible to gain a deep understanding of them. We always talk about it as in these terms, knowing what keeps an employer's company president or other key staff, what keeps them up at night? What are they really concerned about and worried about? What problems would it be possible for the sector partnership to solve? Also, what they value. In addition, what relationships that you can develop, how it's possible to be responsive to their needs, ongoing communication. I talk to folks in sector partnerships who are on a daily basis or more often communication with employers they're working with. And all of that generates trust. And of course, delivering successful on what industry employers need also creates that trust. Focusing on an industry also helps because of the characteristics of the industry. Employers face similar competitive issues. They generally have similar workforce needs, particularly around the skills and the industry-recognized certifications that they want employees to have. Moreover, employers oftentimes know each other if they're in the same industry, and not uncommonly, they work together. There's something else. Engaging with multiple employers is important because it reduces risks for the sector partnership. Any employer can go up and down in terms of their business success. Working with multiple employers helps to smooth that out so that the sector partnership itself isn't dependent on whether that employer is doing well or not in any particular time. It also reduces costs for the sector partnership and for employers because as you grow, as you meet more needs, the cost per individual goes down. Moreover, it creates conditions for the sector partnership to have greater importance in the industry, more opportunities for job seekers and workers, including folks who have been incarcerated, and increased influence as well. Next slide, please. So if a sector partnership focuses on employers in an industry sector, the next question is which employers it is best to work with. And that's increasingly important. Sherry mentioned what the overall unemployment rate is now. So in areas where unemployment rates have really gone down, more and more employers want assistance. And so sector partnerships have to figure out which ones to work with. There's always limitations in resources and time. Setting criteria leads a sector partnership to determine a variety of employer policies and practices that they want to see. And this slide sums that up with the term being an employer of choice. I'll give you some examples of employer policies and practices that make an employer of choice. Understanding the value of their employees, compensating them fairly, treating them well, listening to them, providing opportunities for not only employment but also promotion, and doing all these things in a fair way. So in particular, people who have had arrests and convictions have a fair shake. Employers with these kinds of policies and practices do business in a way that fits very well with the sector partnership goals that I'd mentioned earlier. Working with them makes it possible for a sector partnership to achieve better outcomes. Additionally, employers who fit the criteria also have the potential to strengthen their engagement with a sector partnership. And I'm going to turn to employer engagement now. Next slide, please. This slide shows 5 types of employer engagement in the blue boxes on the left-hand side, and then a few of many examples of that engagement are on the right-hand side. For a sector partnership, part of building the relationship with an employer is strengthening its engagement. Staff can always be ready to ask employers for specific ways to broaden or deepen their engagement. And they do that by identifying examples of each of the types of engagement in the blue boxes on this slide, and determining which of them will both help the employer and help the sector partnership. So staff can do that as a process. You might think of it as a sales process. What's the next thing that you want to convince an employer to do? Staff also need to be able to do some other things, particularly build long-term relationships with an employer that provides mutual benefit, even as that employer's needs change. And that's especially true for employers that can become very strongly engaged. To do that, it's really important to learn about employer representatives, thinking of them not only in terms of their job, but thinking about them in terms of other roles, not only the ones they have, but the ones they want to have, and relationships they have, and relationships they want to develop, also interests they have. And then identify ways to broaden and deepen engagement that are important to the employer representative as well as beneficial to the employer and to the sector partnership. It's always important for staff to demonstrate the benefits to the employer and to the sector partnership of broadening and deepening engagement and to celebrate success. And the reason for this is because as employers engage more fully with the sector partnership, they start to be invested. They start to care about the sector partnership's success as well as their own. And showing that success is important to increasing their engagement because they care. And it's always important to be ready for the moment and ask when it's appropriate rather than when it's not for broader and deeper engagement. And I'll give you an example. If an employer, and this is somebody who's been involved as a customer, they've really benefited from some hires that they've made from a sector partnership, then they might be willing to go farther than that and come to the program site and do mock interviews so they can, in that process, teach folks how to interview successfully. That's just one example. That's the first of the ones on the slide. Next slide, please. So it's likely that you already know that the Workforce Investment Opportunities Act, which passed in 2014 with broad bipartisan support, requires investment in and support of sector partnerships. Among several sections of the law, I want to highlight 2 that require that as I end my part of the presentation. The first requires states, and state workforce boards in particular, to use a portion of state set-aside funds to assist the local areas by providing information on and support of effective development and convening processes and implementation of sector partnerships. And, you know, may be helpful to know that's section 134, parenthesis A, parenthesis 2, parenthesis B. The second section requires that Title I-B funds that are allocated to local areas and particularly local workforce boards must be used to develop, and I should say must be used in part, to develop and convene or implement sector partnerships. And it may be helpful again, that's section 134, parenthesis C, parenthesis 1, parenthesis A, parenthesis 5. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you today. I look forward to your comments and questions during the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jack. We'll now hear about two different sector-based programs, one in a county jail and the other in the community. Let's begin with Allegheny County Jail and Amy McNicholas-Kroll. Welcome, Amy.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being able to talk about some of the exciting things that we're developing in Allegheny County Jail. Next slide. Basically, around 2000, we formed a jail collaborative, which meant the courts began to talk with the jail, who began to talk with the Department of Human Services and the Department of Health. And basically, all the head executives basically talked to each other, saying that we were dealing with a group of individuals that was rotating through our Department of Human Services, ending up in our courts, and then ending up in our jails. And how could we improve public safety, lower the costs of our jail was skyrocketing, because currently, as I sit in our jail today, we have 2,319 individuals in here. And also, the biggest part was to prevent the, disintegration of our communities and families because of the impact of crime. So as you can see from this slide, it was led by a multitude of people. And what we did was, they actually, the county's execs named a group of individuals to sit down together to try to work out how we could just totally improve the whole process. Next slide. So out of the jail collaborative came the main goal: reduce recidivism, quit cycling people from Allegheny County in and out of our jails. So we were going to do that in a threefold way. We were going to improve public safety, we were going to reduce the cost to communities, and just recapture the thousands of men and women that live in this jail. Plus, we also had children of incarcerated parents. We were looking at that focus also, and that's where we wanted to reduce the harm to children and their families. Next slide. So how did we do that? We did that with a three-pronged approach. We were looking at alternatives for individuals from coming into jail. We were trying to make major system changes in our court, in our jails, and with the Department of Human Services. And then most of all, how do we re-enter this individual back into society? Next slide. So we had to look at the population in the jail. Currently, like I said, in our jail, we have 2,319 people. Of that, there's approximately about 500 individuals sentenced in this jail. That means they're going to be here less than 2 years. The rest of the individuals were pre-trial, so we knew they could come and go out of this jail very quickly. So we decided that we were going to look at individuals that were sentenced in our jail that had been in the jail at least 5 to 6 times, which means they were a high or medium risk of getting out of jail and coming back in. And then also we wanted to make sure that they were followed on probation. Next slide. So what did we do? Our phase one, or the in-jail part of this, was they were given a very in-depth assessment. Secondly, we developed like a service plan or a treatment plan with them, and we referred them to a lot of different programming in the jail. And what we did was we went into the community and we looked what the community had to offer if they were willing to come in the jail. Things like employment and training services. For those individuals that needed education services, we went to the, basically Pittsburgh school system and said, because I didn't preface this, Allegheny County Jail encompasses the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Yes, we did win the hockey this season. But anyhow, long story short, we went into the community and asked community providers to come in the jail. So where the system change was for the jail, we had to allow individuals to come in our jail, which pretty much the jail was very offset from the community. We believed in walling ourselves in and not allowing the community in. So this was a major system change to be, to allow drug and alcohol providers, to allow the Pittsburgh public school system to come in here, to allow, most importantly, employment providers to come in and to speak to the inmates in this jail. They also explained to us about that inmates had a lower math level, and in order to take the apprenticeship test to get into any of the unions, your math level needed to be higher. So that's where we allowed teachers to come in and start to work through our pre-apprenticeship program. Next slide. So basically what we did was we took the law library, put it up on the pods on kiosks, because in this jail we have 33 different pods. We put the law library on those kiosks, and we took that space and quickly formed classrooms out of it. Next slide. But most important of this was getting training in the jail. It's pretty unheard of across jails across the United States to allow programming, things like drills and hacksaws and a lot of the different training programs to come in the jail. But we knew if we were going to deter individuals and allow them to leave this jail making a living wage, which in Allegheny County, based on the economy, you have to make $12.50 an hour or better to afford your rent, your utilities, your food, your clothing, and transportation. So at that point, we engaged a lot of different programming, a lot of different training programs. New Century Careers, which is our machining program, is a sector-based partner with our Workforce Investment Board. Also, the Pittsburgh Trade Institute, which does a masonry and construction training, they also are a sector partner. So as we began to work with these individuals, one individual, the New Century Careers, stepped up and said, yes, if you're willing to give us a room, we're willing to send instructors into your jail and to allow your inmates to get 2 national certifications in machining. They're called NIMS. So the individuals that test high enough to get into this machining program and show interest in wanting to spend the rest of their lives in manufacturing companies as machinists we've been doing this now 3.5 years. And so our individuals, we do 10 in the morning and 10 in the evening, because we have count times in the jail, and we have to work around, again, systems changes. We had to work around a whole different changing of the jail, of allowing inmates first to touch things like drills and to have metal plates. But with this, these individuals then get 2 national certifications, manufacturing certifications that they could take to Tennessee, they could take anywhere in the United States. These are 2 national certifications. From there, when they are released, they go to the south side of Pittsburgh, where the New Century Careers, they then work on these big drilling and milling machines and lathes to get their 3rd certification. At that point, they are marketable. But the exciting thing about all the employment, the training programs you see here, when we partnered with them, we said to them that you must have employers that are willing to engage your students when they graduate. And so each of these training programs went out into the community, talked to the human resource departments for many employers, and let them know that some of the individuals training, that graduate from their training programs may have criminal records, and that they, that the individuals, would be more than willing to talk about their criminal records, but they wouldn't partner with the employer, and let them know that we will give you lots of people for you to interview when you have openings, unless you're willing to look at people that have had prior incarcerations. So that opened the door tremendously to a lot of major employers, to finally look at our guys coming out of jail with a different light. So each one of these training programs trains our individuals. They get them certified in whether if it's our Pittsburgh Community Kitchens, you come out with a Serve Safe certification and also a culinary certification. With the Pittsburgh Trade Institute, you come out with a construction certification and your OSHA, the OSHA 10. And then with New Century Careers, you graduate with 3 national certifications that then make you very marketable. But the exciting thing is when our individuals graduate, they automatically, the training companies have their interviews already set up for places like, there's, in our area, it's called Solids and Surfaces and Superbolt. There are major manufacturing companies that the training departments have gone to make sure they're on bus lines, because a lot of our people do not have transportation. So they actually went above and beyond in this secular partnership to make sure that our people that do not have driver's license because of their criminal records or have them suspended for the next couple of years, they're able to get to those employers. So they actually set up the interview, help the inmate, get their resume together, practice interviewing, and then send them on 2 or 3 interviews to be able to get these manufacturing jobs. So it's pretty exciting. Next slide. But the other part, and so this is our program in the jail. As you can see, there are saws and there are hammers in those pictures, and there is a huge toolbox with many drill bits and everything in it that people get into. Also, this was the first time in our jail that we allowed inmates to go on to Tooling U, which is a website that helps them walk through all the tests. All the tests are on there to learn about machining. Next slide. The other important part, which is, again, part of the systems change and part of the collaboration that is needed for this the secular partnership, is that we actually had reentry probation officers and community support specialists, once this individual is released, into the community to support them and to help them get them and their family to get the needed items that they need to just get that foot up to start out the door. So the 2 major things we learned out of this secular partnership was that it takes system changes, but that through collaboration, those system changes are not insurmountable, that they are somewhat easier because you have all the systems wanting to move in the same direction. The other exciting thing is to know that Aerotech, which is a major Fortune 500 company, has hired 15 of our clients that had just, been released from jail. So as I'm ending mine, I just want to tell you that we have this secular partnership has helped us tremendously in the last 4 years get many individuals out of this jail into living wage jobs and with the least amount of bureaucracy and resistance that I've ever seen in my 30 years of working in the criminal justice system. And to know that once we get some of these individuals living wage jobs, they're off the streets forever because now they have the ability to support their family. So I thank you all for allowing me to talk about how exciting this whole secular partnership has been for Allegheny County.
Thank you so much, Amy. And your work's really impressive. And I know that you got your start with a Second Chance Act Career Technology Grant helped you get started with the employment programs. Now we're going to turn to Anthony Atkinson from Towards Employment in Cleveland, Ohio. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you for the introduction. Looking forward to talking to everyone and talking a little bit about what we're doing here in Northeast Ohio. So my hope for this presentation is to really present a further overview like my colleagues have done and to demonstrate further evidence of what's worked when we're talking about working with returning citizens who are seeking employment. As we talk about the sectoral approach and what it offers the opportunity for organizations like ours, as well as those who are tuned in today, to help build skills for those that we work with and help provide opportunities and pathways for them towards advancement. And what we've seen is that this has been done through understanding, as we've talked about, through systems change and really understanding what exists within your region as it turns out in terms of employment and developing those sort of what I call dual paths. And when I talk about dual paths, as we'll talk about in my presentation, is you're not only developing a path for your participants to employers and into jobs, but you're also developing paths for the employers to get into the community and to the participants. So it's a dual relationship, and that's what we'll talk about today. Next slide. So to give a little bit of history about Towards Employment, our mission is to work and empower individuals to achieve and maintain self-sufficiency through employment. So we've been doing this since 1976, and since that time we've worked to assist adults as well as young adults transition from public assistance programs and out of incarceration and into employment. So historically, when we think about what we've done in terms of workforce development, historically we've worked in a traditional workforce model of which I think many of us know is sort of that place-based employment. We work to get individuals placed into jobs. And so we try to get them placed into jobs quickly. And I think, when you think about participants coming into the organization, we've all had that participant who says, I want a job and I want a job now. And so when we think about that traditional model, that's what we're talking about, moving people into jobs quickly. Well, in 2011, we had the opportunity at Towards Employment to move into what's called a sector-based career pathway approach. And so with that approach, we really had the opportunity to think about how to prepare people for jobs, help them get the jobs, how to keep that job, and then importantly also how to advance into a career. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about in my presentation today. Next slide. To give some background in terms of how we came upon this model and how we approached this model, we were given the opportunity and very fortunate to participate in a national demonstration of how sector partnerships work. So we had a project with MDRC out of New York to test out sector-based models. We are one of 4 test sites which were situated to examine sector-based career pathway models versus the traditional approach, place-based approach. For those who were eligible, we were able to offer a comprehensive list of services, which I'll just talk about in a little bit, and we were really able to target specific sectors within our region here in Northeast Ohio, one of them being in particular manufacturing. So we're able to work with individuals, recruit individuals, and really help them target getting into manufacturing fields, which prior to that they might not have had networks to get into before. One of the things that we'll talk about that was key to this model was emphasizing advancement opportunities. So finding jobs that are out there, finding those positions that are out there, but jobs that are also connected to opportunities for advancement and higher wages in the future. And so we really saw the opportunity to build career ladders for our participants. In other words, helping them gain, the credentials that were needed to get into those networks, the credentials that were needed to get into certain positions, and connecting them with opportunities for potential and future growth. Next slide. So from this demonstration of the sector-based programming, we found that there were 5 key components to the model. So if you're looking to move into a sector-based model, these are some of the key components we think that are very important and necessary for moving beyond sort of the typical place-based services and into a sector-based services. So one of the key components was intake and screening. So really upfront, as you're doing your outreach, bringing participants in, really ensuring participants can benefit from the training, but also meet the sector requirements. as one of the colleagues were talking about earlier on this call, is really making sure that they have the math skills and that they have the things that are required to meet going into, let's say, manufacturing, because there is a higher level of math skill that's needed. So we don't want to put someone into a training if they're not able to meet those math skills. So it's really working with participants and doing some bridge programming with them internally to help them get up to those necessary skills so that they feel confident going into that. So that's part of your intake and screening. An important component also is the pre-employment and career readiness services. So your soft skill programs. Traditionally, we all teach soft skill programs, how to do a resume, how to do a cover letter, how to do interviewing, but really making sure that you're contextualizing your curriculum to your specific sector. So making sure that you're doing career planning for them, helping them build those career ladders, so as they're moving forward, they understand that they might enter into an entry-level position, but what's going to be after that? What's next after that? Also important for our participants who are reentry is really helping them understand how do you then interview to get into the manufacturing field. So it's not just a regular interview. What are the skill sets that you have? How do you talk about that? And really making sure that that's part of your curriculum and contextualizing your curriculum. What we also found important that we are able to do here, and we are a test site for that, is the work keys assessment. So really making sure that individuals have that work keys assessment and earn their national career readiness credential. And it really helps us understand better in terms of their placement of where they're going to and moving on to that next step. Important for this also is then having the relationships in terms of occupational skills training. So having partnerships with training partners who we can then send people off to. So as an organization, we don't do the training ourselves, but having partners here like in Northeast Ohio, Associated Builders and Contractors, who are able to train people in carpentry, electrical, HVAC. So really making sure that you're bringing those partners to the table so that they can do the occupational skill training and your participants can actually receive an actual credential. The next step in that is an important part of the model is the job development and placement services. So versus the tradition of just placing someone into a job is having also those intermediaries, those organizations and companies within your region that can sort of network within those fields for you. So here in Northeast Ohio, we're very fortunate to work with manufacturing representatives who had connections to organizations and companies that do manufacturing that we could connect with and help us do job placement to sort of go off and represent our participants to the manufacturers. The last part of this component in this model that's important also is the retention and advancement services. So not only just placing someone in the job and making sure they're in the job, but then going about 30, 60, 90, 180 days later to make sure that they're still in that job, that they're still doing well in that job, and doing wraparound support services for them in terms of career coaching. But also then making sure that there's opportunities within the company that they're at for opportunities to advance in the services that they're in. Next slide. With this model here, our career pathway model, this is very similar to what we were talking about earlier. Jack mentioned this in terms of systematic change. So when you think about an actual model of what works in terms of sector-based career pathway models, you have your inputs in terms of your sector partners, your geographic information of what works in your region. You're doing your targeted outreach within your community, going into the community and finding the people who are in need of employment. You're doing your orientations and your assessments, but then you're thinking about what is the system that you're putting them into. So one of the things I always say is that no one organization can serve, when we think about the reentry population, no one organization can serve all the needs of this population in and of themselves. So it's a matter of making sure that you look at whatever else is around you, other supporting partners, organizations, and making sure that you have other stakeholders at the table who can meet the needs of whether it's transportation, housing, financial literacy. And one of the things we found with our population, and I'm sure others out there who are in this know that particularly stable housing, making sure that legal issues are taken care of, those are huge issues that we need to be able to take care of. And we're not able to necessarily take care of them ourselves, but we want to make sure that we create systems within our community where we have other people who are available to help us out with that. The other part of that in terms of the skill building, like I said earlier in my other slide, is that we don't do the skill building in terms of the technical skills, but we want to make sure that we have other partners at the table. As you're inviting these other partners at the table, it's really important to have them understanding working with this population, because if they're going to be going into their campuses and working at their schools, they need to have an understanding of what it means to work with a reentry population. And so there's sort of a cross-understanding of being able to understand one another's systems, one another's protocols, And really this is an opportunity to sort of develop that so that we make sure that these individuals, as they're going through their career path, have good successes and get to the end, get that credential, get it placed into a job, and then get advancement. Next slide. So from our results, I'm not going to go through each of these results bit by bit, but what I really want to underscore for you is with this demonstration project that we were able to do to test out sector-based things, one of the things that we saw is that for our participants, we saw that they were able to access more services. So we saw that they were able to access more career readiness services. They were able to actually stay in the career readiness services and see it to completion. The individuals were more likely to seek out job support from not only case managers, but for career coaches, and that post-employment career coaching was really important. So using a sector-based model, we saw that there was actually opportunity for more access to services. Additionally, we saw that there were positive employment results. So versus the just place-based employment, we saw that we were able to get more people placed into employment. Those individuals we saw also after 6 months were able to be more advanced in terms of finding other higher positions and higher pay. And we saw a 25% increase in wages for those who did advance. And so again, that then ties into the third point here is the increased earnings that overall for those who came into this demonstration project, we saw a definite higher increase in terms of their earnings. Next slide. We also saw, as reported by our participants in the demonstration, that there was better job quality. Individuals who were going into certain fields felt that they had better shifts, that they had more permanent jobs, that they just weren't temporary jobs that they would just work at for a short time. But they also saw that there were definite career opportunities and career ladders and other positions for them to move into. They didn't feel as if they hit a ceiling and that's just where they were going to be for the rest of their lives. They could see career opportunities that were before them. What they reported also was that they were more willing to stay in a position because of the coaching, because of those wraparound services of individuals coming out, checking with them when maybe they ran into an issue at work, that coaching really was something that really helped them stay in the job and advance within the field. Something that was mentioned earlier by one of my other colleagues is that it levels the playing field. We saw that individuals with criminal backgrounds got jobs at the same rate as those without. So we saw people who went through this process, through this demonstration process of going into sector-based work, that they were able to get advancements just at the same level as those without. Next slide. So what did we learn? And we've kind of talked about some of this already, is that we learned that collaboration is key. Crossing systems across organizations, whether you're a social service agency, you're an intermediary agency working in manufacturing, you're a technical training partner, or you're a work release program working with those who are still incarcerated. Having cross systems and understanding that was really huge. What we're able to do with this is we're able to lead a 10-member collaborative of these different partners to make sure that we have successful implementation. So understanding one another's systems, understanding one another's processes really was key to this. Again, and I think I've emphasized this earlier, is that coaching was really important. 90% of our participants will advance post-employment coaching. And we saw that coaching and having those wraparound support services for individuals after they were placed into employment where someone could go out, speak with them, help them mitigate any barriers was really important to that. Another lesson learned was the sector-based programming delivers. So really contextualizing and having some understanding of the field that you're sending individuals into in that sector was really important to have that language built into your curriculum so that as individuals go off to understand whether it's carpentry, construction, culinary, hospitality, having those languages and those things built into the curriculum was really key. And key to this was also identifying employers who could come in and take part within your job readiness classes and programs. So whether it was them coming in doing mock interviews, whether it was them coming in and talking about best practices and what it means in terms of employer expectations, it was really important having those employers come in to meet the participants, talk to the participants, and sort of share best practices as we have these individuals moving into and going into these different fields. The last lesson learned was just really be patient. Being patient, because it's much different than a traditional historical idea of placing people into employment quickly. It takes time for the training and advancement to pay off, but it's a matter of taking the time and seeing people build these career ladders and build the inroads and the networks into these different sectors. On average, the first advancement we saw was 6 months after placement. So it's really investing in that post-job readiness training in terms of once they were placed and investing into those coaches to be there on site with the participants and making sure that they get checked in, and that really builds up the support. Next slide. So what does this mean all for working with individuals who are returning citizens? So in Cuyahoga County, we have about 3,500 people returning from the state prisons each year, and that's not including those serving time in the county jail or probation. So when we think about trying to reduce recidivism and reduce these rates, what we realize is that there's a lot of people out there needing services and needing employment. And so one of the things we saw in 2016 using this sector-based approach is that we were able to place 320 individuals who came out of prisons and who were dealing with coming back to communities, place them into employment, in full-time employment. 107 of them participated in skills training, and particularly within our region, we saw the sectors of construction, manufacturing, and culinary being those three areas that were more forgiving and willing to work with those who had criminal backgrounds. And so really we saw being able to place these people into these places and help them make those inroads and connections really very strongly having a sector-based approach. The starting wage for individuals moving into this was $10.04, and what we saw is that the advancement wage for individuals was $12.60. And so we really saw, as I end my presentation, that using a sector-based approach was really huge for helping individuals who might not have had inroads before to these particular sectors be very strong and helping them sort of build those networks for the communities.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Unfortunately, we don't have time for many questions, but let me just throw out a question, just a quick answer from each of you. What do you think is the biggest challenge faced when approaching employers about hiring people with criminal backgrounds? Whoever wants to go first.
This is Jack, and I can go first. What we hear from sector partnerships is that the biggest challenge is that employers think that they're taking a big risk. And the way that sector partnerships approach this is that they use two things that the employers know about them. Number one, their track record, and number two, their commitments to the employer's success. And they use both of those to sort of express that they're going to provide the employer an insurance policy and thereby eliminate the risk. And that can be, you know, coming to the employer if there's some problem and troubleshooting it, or it can be providing that kind of post-employment coaching and support services that Anthony just mentioned. Other things too, but those are two examples.
Thank you so much. Anthony or Amy, do you have a quick answer?
I would say dealing with stigma, the stigma of what it means to work with individuals who are incarcerated. So one of the things we always tell people who come to our program and when we work with employers is that no one is forced to be in our program or no one is demanded to be in our program. Individuals come voluntarily. So really helping employers understand that expectation that we have of participants when we send them out for employment, but also giving the opportunity for them to get their foot in the door. So really helping to reduce that stigma of what it means to be formally incarcerated and them having served their time, I think is a big challenge that probably a lot of people in the audience today probably are dealing with as well.
Thanks, Anthony. Amy, did
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing Anthony did. It's just the whole stigma, and also what Jack talked about, you know, with employers always worried about the risk. What happens if, you know, they steal from me or whatever? But it's the employers always feel like somehow, and I always believe it's how TV paints everything, that these guys are dangerous, you know, when there's no, you know, these individuals just want a chance.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This concludes the webinar. I want to thank Jack Mills, Amy McNicholas-Kroll, and Anthony Atkinson for taking time to present today, and thank you to everyone who joined us and submitted questions. You should receive an email with a link to a survey asking for your feedback on the webinar, so please take a moment to fill this out and help us continue to improve the resources that we offer to the field. You'll also receive a link to the recording of the presentation, as well as a link to the PDF of the PowerPoint slides. These links will also be made available on our website, csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC, and I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter there too. And feel free to contact me or the other presenters. Our emails are up with any questions that you have about today's webinar. And thank you so much, and have a great day, everybody.